Welcome to the 25th episode of the Goldenberg Destiny Project. 1,000 years before the Common Era, there was a power vacuum in the imperial quadrant. The great empires of Babylonia, which we encountered in the time of Avram, where they invaded Canaan, those empires were in decline. The Egyptians were also concerned with attacks that they were facing from the Nubians to the south, so they were distracted and they were not able to project their power into the center of the imperial quadrant. The Hittites, who had an empire that was based in the north, in what is today Turkey, and it reached down into Canaan, the Hittites also were in decline because they were having internal problems with I don't know what, and they were also facing attacks from the sea peoples who are these marauding people who are related to the Philistines. They came from the islands. The Philistines themselves used to be sea peoples, so they had their hands full, so they were in decline. They were not in their full strength. The Greeks and the Romans were still running around in the forest, barbarians. Like who else was there? There was nobody else. It was a vacuum. Philistia, the Philistines, at this time rose up and became the dominant regional power. They, in the center of the imperial quadrant, which is not into Babylonia, but in Canaan and in Lebanon and in those countries, Philistia was the power. There were all the Ammonites and the Amalekim and the Moabites and the Syrians, the Arameans. All those countries were dominated by the Philistines, who are the most powerful country. Philistia was a militaristic society. What does that mean? That means that you have certain societies, their focus is military power. Like Sparta is very famous. Sparta in Greece was a military society. Another example is Prussia in the 19th century was a militaristic society. They're focused on military power. They glorify fighting and strength. Their resources, their education, their training, everything are directed towards military power. Individual rights are subservient to the strength and of the military and the security of the state. Those are militaristic states. Philistia was a militaristic society. When the Torah talks about a country, it usually identifies them by their king. Like Hushan, the king of Aram, attacked. It's always the king. But when we talk about Philistia, we talk about the Chamesh Sarnei Plishtim, the 5 generals, the 5 commanders of Plishtim. Plishtim had 5 cities. It was Gaza and Gas and Ekron and Ashdod and Ashkelon. Each of these cities had a commander, a military commander, and we're always dealing with them. When the Jewish people entered Canaan to conquer it, they could not deal with the 5 Sarnei Plishtim, the 5 commanders of Plishtim. They were too strong. But at the same time, we do find that Philistia had a king. I mean, at least maybe each of the cities has its own king. Because when King David ran away from the persecution of King Saul, then he ran into Gas and he went to Achish Melech Gas. So Gas had a king, but it also had a general, which shows you that they were ruled by diarchies. That means a dual government. There was a king who ruled the country and was in charge of internal affairs. He was in charge of the economy, and there was also a general who was in charge of external affairs, of security, of the military. They had a dual, so they had a king and they had the generals. When you had to contend with Philistia, you were not contending with the king, you were contending with the generals. You find this also in the Torah, that when Avimelech was the king of Gerar, who was also a Philistine, a different group of Philistines. He wasn't from the 5 cities of Philistia, but he was from Gerar, and he was there at the earlier time, as we discussed in one of the earlier episodes. But when he made a covenant with Avram about the wells, and the covenant of peace and non-aggression, and he came to meet Avram, and he came Avimelech, who Fichol Sar Tzavoi. He came along with Fichol, who was the general of the army. Now, in general, always you don't find that the king, when a king comes, he comes. The king comes. Like, do we say he came with a Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, and his Transportation Secretary. The king is the king. The king is the head. So when he comes, the king is the one that's negotiating. But over here you see, why does the Torah mention Fichol? Apparently because Avimelech had a general who was parallel to him. He was the external military ruler, and Avimelech was the internal ruler, and if you're going to make a covenant, you needed both of them to sign onto it. And later, when Avimelech also made a covenant with Yitzchak, he had the same thing. Avimelech came, and Fichol, I guess, was a little bit older than Fichol probably was now a white-haired general, but he also came along. Because when you make a covenant, when the Philistines make a covenant, the king is not enough. You have to have the king and a general. So this underlines that this was a militaristic society, and the general was focused completely on the military, and there was training, and there was weapons, and everything was... Now this was... militaristic societies are difficult to deal with. If you have a society that the military is, the farmers pick up the pitchforks and they come around to the battlefield, okay, you could deal with them, but you're dealing with an elite trained forces who are like all the time, they're always training and working with their weapons and fighting and everything. It's very difficult to deal with them. So when the Jewish people conquered Canaan, and Philistia is in the southwest corner of Canaan, and that was in the portion of Yehuda, but they were not able to capture it. It was too hard because of the Philistine. They couldn't capture it, so they stayed there. Now, in the beginning, they were not yet a regional power. They were just one of the countries, and they were pretty strong. Occasionally, they used to make incursions into Canaan, into Israel, and together with Ammonim, together with other people, but they were still rising. In 950, before the Common Era, the Philistines had arrived. At this point, they felt they had the power. So they invaded Israel, and they conquered it. They totally colonized it. They built garrisons all over Israel where they had their army. It was a military occupation. It wasn't just that they beat them and they had them pay taxes. They actually had a military occupation. They lived under a military occupation from after this conquest. And this was understandably very difficult and very oppressive. Now, in 930, there was a little bit of a glimmer of hope. Now, 930, there was a story, the story of Shimshon HaGibor, the great, powerful Samson. There's a lot of misconception about Samson. The story of Samson is fictionalized and romanticized, and in the general perception, which is not coming from the perspective of the house of classical Judaism, sees him as Hercules. This is big guy, big arms, and is able to this and that, and so let me tell you the story of Samson, and I'll tell you the way it's in the Tanakh, and the way the Mefarshim explain it, and much of it is very clear from the psukim themselves, from the verses. It's very clear what the story is. But if you just take it out and you pull out, Samson and Delilah, like what is this all about? Samson, I'll call Shimshon, his mother did not have children, and an angel came and told her that you will have a child, and he will help the Jewish people, and he has to be a Nazir. That means that a Nazir is somebody who is sanctified for God, and he's not allowed to drink any wine, he's not allowed to cut his hair. There are certain different rules for a Nazir like Shimshon, which is not to get into at this point. But he's not a regular Nazir, because a regular Nazir is not allowed to walk into a cemetery. But this is called the Nazir Shimshon. But it's a very strict thing, and he was sanctified. And God gave him great powers. He gave him great strength. And the strength of Shimshon did not come from big bulging biceps. The strength was a supernatural strength that God gave him. Every time he exercised his strength, the pasuk says, "V'atehi olav ruach Hashem." The Spirit of God was upon him, and he was able to do it. It was not the spirit of musculature. It was the Spirit of God was upon him, and at that time he was able to do, superhuman physical feats. But it was just supernatural. It was not something that came from the strength of his muscles. Now, he was not allowed to cut his hair. Not ever allowed to cut his hair his whole life. And not allowed to drink wine, as we said. Now, he was able to do, with his power, he was able to do things that were incredible. He was able to fight a lion. He was able to defeat an army with the jawbone of a donkey. So he was able to take this bone and use it to defeat an army, which is really not something that I guess even Hercules could do. It's something really very special. He became the next judge. He was a sage. He was a Talmud Chacham. He was able to rule in the Torah. But the way he helped Klal Yisrael, the way he helped them was not the way the other judges helped them after times of chaos, as we spoke last time, by going around and inspiring them. He helped them in a different way. He helped them by being able to attack the Philistines and limit their power, lower their power. Like one time he destroyed an army, he was able to do this. He was a weapon. And that's how he was able to defend the Jewish people. So one time he went to a place called Timnah, and he saw a Philistine woman. Her name was Delilah. And he went to his parents and he said, "Please, take for me this woman." Now, what does that mean, take for me this woman? He was already a grown man, and he was a sage, but it meant that they should convert her to Judaism. And they didn't like the idea. They said, "What are you doing? There are not enough good Jewish women. What are you doing? You're demeaning all Jewish women. People are going to think that Shimshon needs a wife, and the Jewish women are not good enough for him. He has to go take a Philistine woman and convert her. What are you doing? You might see laz. It's a calumny on Jewish women." And they didn't approve of it. They didn't understand. But the pasuk says that they didn't understand because this was from God. God wanted them to do this. Why? Because by marrying a Philistine convert, he kind of was able to distance himself from the center of the Jewish people. He was a little bit different. Everybody's married Jewish women. He's got to get himself a Philistine convert. So then when he does things to attack the Philistines, they will not think that this is coming from the central authorities of the Jewish people. It's coming as he's doing it on his own. It's his own thing. He's eccentric. He does things. That's why he married this Philistine woman named Delilah. The Philistines understood that he was a dangerous man. They saw what he was doing. He was, he killed the lion. He attacked the Philistine army. They saw he was dangerous. So they needed to know. They looked at this man, and they saw a Jewish man with a white beard, with a Jewish rabbinical cloak, and he's able to do these fantastic things. How does he do this? They understood that this is not Hercules. They understood that he has some kind of a charm, some kind of a secret thing which gives him the power. And they wanted to know, what is this power? What is the source of this power? So they went to his wife, Delilah. Says, Delilah, you may be Jewish now, but you're still one of us. You're a Philistine woman. We need you to find out, ask your husband, find out what is his power. What is the source of his power? And if you do this, then all the five generals went to her. Not any king, the five generals, because this was a security threat. This was a military issue. So the generals came, and they were the ones, all five generals went to Delilah, and they said, help us out. Now, we will give you money. Each of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver. Now, I don't know. I didn't find anywhere why 1,100. Why not 1,000 or what's 1,100? So I thought maybe they'll give her 5,000 to invest and 500 walking around money. But I don't know. But this is what they offered her. It was a nice sum of money, and she was greedy and she wanted the money. So a husband, okay, she'll get a different husband. So she asked him what is the reason, and he gave her one story, another story, nothing worked, and she was not able to. And finally, she said, she begged him and pleading with him, and he told her that it's his hair. That his hair is, of course, he's a Nazir, and his hair is a symbol of his Naziris, that he is sanctified for God and separated. It is his hair. So she went and cut off his hair. She got her money, and she cut off his hair. And the generals of the army, they came and they captured him, and they tied him up and they put out his eyes, and they took him to Gaza. They took him to the temple of Dagon, their god, and they made it was a big celebration, and they tied him up there. This Jewish rabbi, and shorn of his hair, and he's standing there between the two pillars, and he didn't have his power anymore, and he was just standing there. And they had it was a big deal. They had all the generals were there, and all the officials and the nobility. It was like this was a major event, and he prayed. He prayed to God, and he said, please give me my strength one more time. And God gave him the strength, and he pushed the pillars apart, and the whole temple came crashing down and killing everybody that was there. I don't know, maybe there were a couple of survivors. But basically what he did was he decapitated the Philistine government. It was just like the whole elite, the whole ruling class, where everybody was there at this fantastic celebration where they're going to see the captured Shimshon is there, and who knows what they're going to do to him. And they were all there, and they perished. So he decapitated the Philistine government, and this was a big improvement in the condition of the Jewish people, because they withdrew the military occupation. They were not there anymore. They pulled out the soldiers from the garrison. I guess they had to rebuild their country, and so they were not able at this time also to manage a military occupation of another country. But they kept a civilian administration in place. That means they still had governors and everything, but they were not supported by marching troops through the streets, but they still had power and authority, because if you revolt, and there's always the threat that they're going to invade from Philistia, they're going to send an army and do it again. So as long as the army was out, so the people remained subservient to the Philistine civilian administration. And they did not allow them to have blacksmiths. They were not allowed to make iron, because the Philistines had these great weapons made of iron, very strong weapons. And the Jews were not allowed to have blacksmiths because they should not make surreptitiously. They shouldn't make weapons that they could fight against the Philistines. Now, so after this happened, he became the judge in 930 before the Common Era, and he destroyed Gaza in 910. And he died along with everybody else. So now there was a need for a new judge, and he was replaced by Eli HaKohen. Eli, the high priest, he was simultaneously high priest and also the shofet, also the judge. Now, and this was in 910, before the Common Era. Almost 20 years later, in 891, before the Common Era, there was an incursion of Philistine army, and the Jewish army fought against them, and they were not successful, and they withdrew to regroup and to see what to do. So the Zakanim, the elders, suggested that maybe the way to defeat the Philistines was to take the Aron Kodesh, the Holy Ark, from which was in the Mishkan in Shiloh, and the tablets, the original tablets of the commandments, were in the Holy Ark. And if we take that out into the battlefield, maybe this will give us the power to defeat the Philistines. And they did that, and it really was frightening to the Philistines, but they were able to overcome, and they fought very hard, and they captured the Holy Ark. They captured the Aron HaKodesh, and they took it to Philistia. Now, when this was a disaster, I mean, the Holy Ark, this is like the heart and the life of the Jewish people, and it's been captured, and it's in a different country. And so when Eli HaKohen, when he heard that this happened, it was too much for him. He was already old, and he fell over, and he died. So that was, and he was succeeded by Shmuel Hanavi. It was, I'm not going to get into the story of Shmuel now, but he was the ward of Eli HaKohen. He lived in the Mishkan together with him. He was his disciple, and he was a prophet. He became the judge, and he was the greatest of the judges by far, and he was also the last of the judges. Now, 7 months after he became judge, then the Philistines, they were not having such an easy time having Aron Kodesh by them. All kinds of disasters were happening. They realized that something has changed here, and it's the presence of the Aron Kodesh here which is causing all these calamities. So after 7 months of it being there, they returned it to Israel. Shmuel was the judge, and he went back to the old system of what a judge does. A judge goes around, and he speaks to the people, he rebukes them, and he teaches them, and he inspires them, and he tells them to eradicate all the idols and everything. And he was doing a fairly good job of it. He was doing a fairly good job. But the people came to him and they said, look, you are Shmuel, you are who you are. Tremendous, charismatic, fiery prophet, but your sons are not up to you. And without getting into details about them, but they're not up to your level. We don't see any other great judge on the horizon. You're older already. When you die, who is going to replace you? How are we going to navigate the situation here? We're still only a country without a government. without a formal government, basically a big tribal country. We're all just, and we have this informal way of regulating ourselves and dealing with each other. We don't have a good structured government, and you are able to maybe work with this and inspire us and galvanize us and get us to to come to a point maybe where we could fight the Philistines, but it's going to take a while, and you are not, you have no successor, and the Philistines are just like too much. I mean, how are we going to deal with these Philistines? The old system of getting inspired, getting together, kicking them out, it's not going to work so easily with the Philistines. And then, on the other side, you have the Ammonites. Nachash HaAmoni is also coming up. So on the, to the east we have to deal with Nachash HaAmoni. To the west we have to deal with the Philistines. How are we going to do this? You have to get us a king. Soim Tosem Aleinu Melech Kechol HaGoyim. Appoint for us, anoint for us, appoint for us a king. Just like all the other countries are led by kings, we also want to be led by a king. And when Shmuel heard this, he was outraged. Why was he outraged? We'll talk about this in the next episode. Thank you very much. I'd like to invite you to visit me at RabbiReinman.com and explore all my works, both completed and still in progress, and kindly take the opportunity to lend your support on the participant page. Thank you very much, and be well.